What if the jealous little heart trying to keep two souls apart was the very thing destined to bind them? Every scheme a step closer, every wound a thread. We begin this story now. The 7th floor laboratory had once been a disused classroom, and it had never quite forgiven anyone for the conversion. Cold leaked through the mullioned windows where the lead had loosened, and the candles guttered in a draught no charm seemed able to seal. Outside, the November rain came down in long grey ropes, drumming against glass that had watched 4 centuries of weather without learning to keep any of it out. Hermione Granger had stopped noticing the cold around 9 o'clock. She had stopped noticing most things. The ache in her shoulders, the cramping in the hand that had been holding her wand for 3 hours, the fact that her tea had gone the colour of pond water and twice as cold. There was only the bench in front of her, the careful geometry of silver filings and crushed moonstone arranged in a spiral, and the single sentence she had written and rewritten in the margin of her notebook until the parchment had begun to fur at the edges, the tooth of it catching against her cuff each time she leaned in. Consciousness without suffering, animation without bondage. That was the whole of it. That was the thing she had been chasing since 4th year, since a badge and a tin of donations and the slow, humiliating discovery that the world she loved was built on the labour of creatures who could not say no. If a charm could wake a thing gently, could grant it just enough awareness to choose, and no more, so it understood its work without being chained to it, then perhaps, you're going to set the room on fire. She did not look up. I've calibrated for thermal bleed. You said that in October, and Pomfrey grew my eyebrows back with a salve that smelled like a dead Kneasel. That, Hermione said, was your wand work, not my calibration. Draco Malfoy was sitting on the far stool with the particular stillness of someone who had decided, hours ago, that he would rather be anywhere on Earth and had nothing better to do than make sure she knew it. He had his sleeves rolled to the elbow, the left one always a fraction lower than the right, always, every single day. And she had long since stopped pretending not to notice and started pretending she had never noticed at all. The bite of a silver ring caught the candlelight when he moved his hand. His mother's, she thought, though she had never asked and never would. They had been assigned to each other in the 2nd week of term. Cross-disciplinary partnership, the parchment from McGonagall had called it, in a tone that brooked no argument and a script that had clearly been written through a clenched jaw. Animation theory was Hermione's. Stabilization arithmancy, the cold, exacting mathematics that kept a charm from devouring itself, was his, and irritatingly, he was good at it. Better than good. He saw the failure points in her equations the way a surgeon sees a tumour, instantly and without sentiment, and it galled her that the work was stronger for him being in the room. It galled her more that she had stopped flinching when he leaned over her shoulder to point at a line of figures. The 3rd term, he said now, not moving from his stool. You've left the 3rd term open. I've left it open deliberately. A closed loop strangles the charm before it wakes. An open loop pours power into the object until the object can't hold it. You'll overfill it. He paused. You'll drown the thing before it draws breath. The phrase landed oddly in the cold air, more careful than his usual contempt, and she glanced up before she could stop herself. He was looking at the spiral of filings, not at her. There was a tightness at the corner of his mouth that she had learned over 6 weeks of these endless nights to read the way one reads weather. The small barometric shifts that meant the storm was somewhere in him and had not yet decided where to break. "I'll cap it," she said. "After, once it's stable." "There won't be an after if you—" "Then help me, or stop talking. Those are the options." A muscle moved in his jaw. For a moment, she thought he would simply rise, gather his coat and leave her to it. And she was appalled to find that the thought sat in her chest like a swallowed stone. Then he set down the quill he'd been turning over and over between 2 fingers and crossed the room and stood beside her. Not behind. Beside, close enough that she could smell the faint metallic ghost of the stabilizing hex still clinging to his hands. Ozone and crushed mint. The scent of someone who worked with dangerous arithmetic for pleasure. "Give me the wand," he said. "It's my charm. And it's my arithmancy holding it together, so unless you'd like to explain to McGonagall why the 7th floor smells of burnt Kneasel again." He held out his hand, palm up, the silver ring catching fire in the candlelight. "We do the incantation together, or we don't do it tonight." She should have argued. Arguing with Draco Malfoy had been, for most of her life, a reflex as automatic as breathing, a thing she did to feel the shape of her own conviction. But it was past midnight, and the rain had not stopped, and his hand was steady in a way that hers had not been for the last hour. And somewhere underneath the exhaustion was a small, treacherous relief at not being alone in the room when the thing finally woke. She laid her wand across his palm. His fingers closed over the wood and over the side of her hand where it still gripped the handle, and neither of them moved to let go. The contact was nothing. A graze of skin, warmth against the cold of the laboratory. It should have been nothing. It was not nothing. She felt the static of it travel up the inside of her wrist, felt the small, frantic stutter of her own pulse against the place where his thumb rested. And she looked up, and he was already looking down at her with an expression she had no name for and no wish to name. And the candle between them leaned in the draught and threw both their shadows huge against the far wall. 2 dark shapes bent close over a spiral of silver. "On 3, he said. His voice had dropped. "Granger, I heard you. 1. The filings began to shiver. 2. The moonstone glowed soft and white, like the moon itself had been crushed and laid on the bench. 3. They spoke the incantation together. Her Latin, his arithmantic counter-rhythm braided beneath it like a second voice singing harmony. And the spiral of silver rose off the bench in a slow column, turning, and the light in the room bent toward it the way water bends toward a drain. Hermione felt the charm catch, felt it take, felt the 3rd term yawn open exactly as she had designed, the power pouring through it clean and bright. And then too bright. "The cap," Draco said sharply. "Granger, the cap. It's overfilling." "It's not. It's holding." "It is not holding." The column of silver flared white. Some instinct older than thought made Hermione throw out her free hand, not to cap the charm, but to ground it, to give the overflow somewhere to go that was not her own chest, and the nearest object on the cluttered bench, the only thing within reach of her flung fingers, was the half-forgotten remains of her lunch, abandoned hours ago at the corner of the workspace. A banana. The light leapt from the spiral into her hand and out through her fingertips and into the fruit in a single white arc. And there was a sound like a held breath being let go. And then the column collapsed, the filings raining down onto the bench. The moonstone gone dark, the candles all snuffed at once by the pressure of it, so that for one ringing instant the laboratory was black and silent and full of the smell of ozone and scorched sugar. Draco's hand was still over hers on the wand. She could hear him breathing. She could hear the rain. "Lumos," she whispered, and her wand tip bloomed, and the cold blue light fell across the wreckage of 3 hours' work, the scattered silver, the dead moonstone, the curl of smoke rising from her notebook where a spark had caught the corner, and the banana. It sat at the edge of the bench where it had always sat, yellow gone faintly luminous, faintly gold, as though something had been lit inside it and had not yet decided whether to go out. For 1 second, Hermione thought it was only the after-image of the flare burned into her eyes. Then it moved. Not much. A small, deliberate shift, a settling, the way a sleeping thing turns toward warmth. The stem at its top swiveled with the slow gravity of a head lifting, and where the curve of the fruit caught the blue wand light, there was, she would swear to it later, would write it in her notebook in a hand that shook, the unmistakable impression of something attending, something aware. Something that had, in the space of a single heartbeat, decided that the most important object in the universe was the woman holding the light. Beside her, very quietly, Draco said a word she had not previously heard him use in front of a professor or a portrait. Hermione did not answer. She could not look away from the fruit. And the fruit, luminous, impossible, newborn, could not look away from her. And as the two of them stared at the thing they had made, it turned its bright attention from Hermione's face to the man whose hand was still wrapped warm around hers on the wand, and something in the quality of its glow changed, hardened, cooled from gold to a sullen, jealous amber, as though it had looked at Draco Malfoy and understood, in the very first moment of its existence, exactly what he was. A rival. The thing about a secret, Hermione had always believed, was that it grew heavier the longer you carried it alone. By that logic, she ought to have been crushed flat by morning, because she carried two, the banana and the fact that she had not been able to make herself leave it behind in the laboratory. It sat now in the 3rd drawer of her desk in the 8th-year girls' dormitory, wrapped in a silk scarf she had sacrificed without much grief, breathing, if a fruit could be said to breathe, in the dark. She had tried, at 3 in the morning, to leave it on the bench where it belonged. She had got as far as the door. And then she had looked back and found it had rolled to the very edge of the workspace, as far toward her as it could come without tumbling off, its faint gold light pulsing in a rhythm that was unmistakably distress, and the small, ridiculous scientific part of her brain that catalogued everything had noted. Attachment behavior, object to creator, observe and record, and the larger and more dangerous part had simply scooped it up and tucked it inside her coat against her ribs, where it had gone instantly, blissfully still. She had not slept. She had lain in the dark, listening to lavenders even breathing across the room, and feeling the faint warmth of the drawer through the wood of the desk, and she had thought, with the particular clarity that comes at 4 in the morning, I have done something I do not understand, and I am going to have to tell him. That was the worst of it. She was going to have to tell Draco Malfoy. He was already in the laboratory when she arrived, which surprised her. He made a point, most mornings, of arriving precisely 4 minutes after her, a small territorial ritual that announced he had somewhere better to be and had condescended to come anyway. But today, he was bent over the bench where the disaster had happened, and he had a quill in one hand and her notebook open beneath the other, and he was reading her records of the night before with an attention so total that he did not look up when the door opened. "You overfilled the 3rd term by a factor of 9, he said to the parchment. 9. I told you it would drown. It didn't drown. No." He turned a page. The bite of the silver ring tapped once against the wood. It did considerably worse than drown. Now he did look up, and the grey of his eyes had the flat, dangerous quality of pond ice. "Where is it, Granger?" She had not decided how to answer this. She had rehearsed several answers on the cold walk down from the tower, and all of them now seemed equally absurd. And so she did the only thing that felt honest, which was to reach into her bag and lift out the silk-wrapped bundle and set it, very gently, on the bench between them. She drew back the scarf. In daylight, the banana looked almost ordinary. Almost. The gold luminescence had faded with the dawn to something subtler, a faint inner warmth, like a coal under ash, visible only if you knew to look. It sat on the silk in the grey window light, and for a moment it did nothing at all, and Hermione felt the first cold lap of doubt. I imagined it. I was exhausted. I imagined the whole thing. And then it turned toward her. The movement was small and certain and entirely deliberate, the stems swivelling like a compass needle finding north, the whole body of the fruit tilting a few degrees on the silk so that its curve faced her fully. The inner warmth flared. And there was that quality again, the one she had no clean word for, the sense of being regarded, of having the full and adoring attention of something that had never wanted anything before, and now wanted only one thing, which was to be near her. Draco was very still. "Tell me," he said slowly, "that the fruit did not just look at you. It looked at me. Fruit does not look. This one does." He set down the quill. He came around the end of the bench, and the moment he moved, the moment his shadow fell across the silk, the banana's gentle glow snuffed out like a pinched candle, and the fruit rolled with startling speed to put the full width of Hermione's hand between itself and him. The inner light came back hard and cold, amber going towards something almost red, and the stem pointed at Draco like an accusing finger. He stopped. For a long moment, the three of them held their positions in the grey light, the woman, the man, and the small, furious fruit between them. And Hermione watched the comprehension arrive on Draco's face in stages. Disbelief, then a flicker of something that might have been the urge to laugh, and then, as the banana's hostile glow intensified in direct proportion to how near he stood, a dawning, appalled understanding. "It doesn't like me," he said. "No, a banana doesn't like me. It appears not." "Why?" said Draco Malfoy, with the air of a man whose dignity was undergoing structural failure in real time. "Does the fruit have opinions about me, Granger?" She had no answer for him. She had spent the night assembling theories and discarding them, and the only one that fit the evidence was so ludicrous she could not bring herself to say it aloud. That in the half-second the charm had woken, the first face it had seen had been hers, lit gold, and the second face, leaning close over the same wand, the same hand, had been his. That the newborn thing had opened its awareness on the two of them and drawn from the geometry of that single frozen instant a conclusion of breathtaking simplicity. She is the center of all things, and he is the one too close to her. She was not going to say that. Saying it would require examining the part of the theory that involved his hand around hers, and the warmth of it, and the fact that she had thought about that warmth more times in the intervening 12 hours than she was prepared to admit to anyone, least of all herself. "It's an animation artifact," she said instead, briskly, retreating into the safe, cold country of the technical. "An overfilled charm produces unpredictable attachment imprinting. It bonded to me because I grounded the overflow through my own hand. It's a kind of imprinting, like a duckling. It's not personal. It rolled away from me, Granger. Ducklings do not roll away from people. Ducklings have a famously low threshold for who they will love." He crouched slowly until his eyes were level with the bench, and he studied the fruit, and the fruit studied him back with a malevolence that no duckling had ever achieved. "It's not imprinting. It's a grudge. Don't be absurd. You don't be absurd. Look at it." He reached out one finger, not to touch, only to gesture, and the banana flung itself bodily across the silk and struck the side of his hand, a soft, indignant thud, and recoiled and brandished its stem, and Draco snatched his hand back as though the fruit had teeth. "It hit me. It hit me. Did you see that?" "I saw it." She was, to her horror, having to fight a smile. The expression on his face, the patrician outrage of a Malfoy assaulted by produce, was undoing 6 years of carefully maintained loathing in the space of a morning, and she hated that it was, and she could not stop it. "I think you've offended it." "I have offended it. It's been alive for 9 hours, and it's already decided I'm—" He stopped. Something crossed his face, quick and dark, and was gone before she could read it, the storm moving somewhere behind the ice. He straightened. When he spoke again, the heat had drained out of his voice and left something flatter and more careful in its place. "It doesn't matter. We have to unmake it." The smile died on her mouth. "No. Granger, no. It's alive, Draco. It's the first successful animation in... It's the entire point of the project. It's the thing I've been working toward for years, and you want to... What? Vanish it? Drop it in a cauldron?" She had moved without deciding to, had put her own hand on the bench beside the fruit, half a barrier, and the banana pressed its warm side against the edge of her palm and went still and trusting. And the trust of it, the absolute defenseless trust, made something twist hard under her sternum. "I'm not killing it. I made it. It's mine to look after." "It's an unstable charm. You wrote the figures yourself. You overfilled the 3rd term by a factor of 9. You have no idea how long the animation will hold. You have no idea what it'll do as it degrades. And you have, demonstrably, no control over its behavior." He had not raised his voice. That was the thing she was learning about him in these long, cold weeks, that the more it mattered, the quieter he got, the storm sinking deeper instead of breaking. It's already shown it'll act on what it wants. What happens when what it wants is something that hurts you? It won't hurt me. You can't know that. I know it loves me, she said, and the word was out before she could weigh it, naked and ridiculous in the grey morning air, and they both heard it land. Loves. The banana's glow brightened to a tender gold at the sound of her voice saying the word, as though it understood, as though it had been waiting its whole 9-hour life to be named, and Draco's jaw tightened, and for a moment neither of them moved. Fine, he said at last. The single syllable cost him something. She could see it cost him something. Fine. We don't unmake it. We contain it. We study the degradation. We document it. We keep it where it can't. He gestured at the fruit. Where it can't conduct guerrilla warfare against the project. We have the stabilizing review with McGonagall in 9 days. If we walk in there with a sentient banana that assaults anyone who comes within a foot of you, she'll shut the whole thing down, and we'll both have wasted a year. It was infuriatingly sensible. It was the most sensible possible response, and she resented him for it, and she resented herself more for the small, warm flush of relief that he had said we, that he had not simply walked out, that the alternative he'd reached for was containment and not the cauldron. All right, she said. Containment. We keep it in the lab. Together. Together, he agreed sourly, and reached again for the notebook. And the banana, which had been listening to every word of this, with the cold attention of a general receiving terms of surrender, chose that precise moment to act. As Draco's hand crossed the bench toward the parchment, the fruit rolled, fast and silent, directly into the path of the open inkwell at the corner of the workspace, and struck it square, and the well tipped, and a black tide of ink surged across 3 hours of Hermione's painstakingly recopied notes, and over the cuff of Draco's white shirt, and down onto the silk scarf, and the bench, and the floor. And in the half-second of frozen horror that followed, the banana rolled serenely back to the centre of its silk, and pointed its stem at Draco Malfoy, with the unmistakable air of a creature that had just won the opening battle of a long, long war. The ink would not come out. Hermione discovered this over the following 3 days, in increments, as the banana refined its methods. The first inkwell had been crude, a frontal assault, a tipping, and a flood. But the fruit learned. By the second day, it had abandoned brute force for something closer to artistry. It waited. It chose its moments with a patience that no 9-day-old creature had any right to possess, and it struck only when the consequence would fall on Draco, and the blame, plausibly, on chance. A loosened jar lid that gave way the instant he lifted it, dusting his sleeves in powdered asphodel. A bench stool that rocked at the precise moment he leaned his weight on it, so that he caught himself with one hand flat in a puddle of cooling wax. A page of his arithmetic working. His, not hers, she noted. The fruit had grown discriminating. That went missing from a closed folder and reappeared hours later, soaked through and unreadable, behind the cold ash of the unlit hearth. It's escalating, Draco said on the 3rd evening, holding the ruined page up to the candlelight as though sheer aristocratic disapproval might dry it. You realize that. It started with ink. Now it's conducting reconnaissance. It knew which folder. It knew which page. That's not imprinting, Granger. That's strategy. Hermione, who had spent the afternoon trying and failing to reverse the ink stain on her notes with 4 separate charms, did not look up from her work. It's pattern matching. It's observed that those pages are important to you, so it targets them. There's nothing strategic about... It hid the page where I wouldn't look, behind the grate. Why behind the grate, if there's nothing strategic about it? She had no answer for that, which had become the recurring shape of these conversations. And so she said nothing, and the silence filled the cold room and the rain. It had not stopped raining since the night the thing woke, the whole of November dissolving into a single grey downpour, kept up its long, patient drumming on the glass. The banana sat on the windowsill where she had placed it, ostensibly to keep it out of trouble. In fact, because she had noticed it grew listless and dim when it could not see her, and brightened when it could. It was watching Draco now with the cold amber attention it reserved for him, and Hermione, glancing up, caught the exact moment its glow sharpened, and followed its line of sight, and understood, a half-second too late, what it was looking at. The shelf above the hearth, the heavy brass scales balanced on their pivot that Draco was standing directly beneath. Draco. She did not think. There was no thought in it at all, only the lunge, only her hand closing on the front of his robes and hauling him sideways with a strength that surprised them both. And the brass scales came down where his head had been, with a crash that rang through the cold stone like a struck bell, and the two of them fetched up against the bench in a graceless tangle, her hand still fisted in his collar, his arm. She registered it distantly through the roar of her own pulse, thrown around her to take the impact, to keep her from going down against the hard edge of the workspace. For a moment, neither of them moved. She was aware of the warmth of him, suddenly and acutely, the heat of his body where the cold of the room had been a minute before. Aware of the rapid beat of his heart under the hand still gripping his robes. Aware of the scent of him this close, ozone and crushed mint, and underneath it, something warmer, skin and wood smoke. And aware, most of all, of his eyes, very near to hers, the pond ice grey shocked wide open and looking at her with no armour on his face at all, none. The whole careful edifice of contempt simply gone. "You," he started, and his voice came out wrong, rough, and he stopped and tried again. "You pulled me out of the way. It dropped the scales on you. You pulled me out of the way," he repeated, as though the first fact had to be established before any other could be considered, as though it were the single most disorienting thing that had happened in a week, that had included a sentient banana declaring war on him. "Granger, you could have let it. 3 weeks ago, you'd have helped it. Don't be ridiculous. 3 weeks ago," he said, lower, and he had not let go of her, and she had not let go of him, and the rain came down. "You'd have handed it the scales." She should have stepped back. The moment had stretched past anything that could be excused as physics, past the half-second of a fall. They were simply standing now, holding each other in the candlelight, while a fruit glowered murderously from the windowsill, and the longer she failed to move, the harder it became to move at all. The air between them gone thick and charged, a static she could feel on her skin, like the breath before lightning. "I don't want you dead," she said. It came out quieter than she'd meant. Whatever I wanted 3 weeks ago, I don't want that. Something moved across his face. The storm surfacing, the thing he kept sunk deep behind the ice. His hand, the one at her back, shifted. She felt the spread of his fingers through the fabric, felt him become aware of where it rested, and for one suspended instant, she thought. She did not let herself finish the thought. The banana flung itself off the windowsill. It was a long drop, longer than the fruit had ever risked, and it landed with a soft, bruising thud and rolled, hard and fast and furious, directly into the back of Draco's ankle. And he startled, and the spell of the moment broke, and they sprang apart as though the few inches of air between them had caught fire. Hermione's hand went to her own collar, then to her sleeve, smoothing the cuff that did not need smoothing. Once, twice, a frantic small ritual of composure while her heart slammed against her ribs. Draco turned away to retrieve his fallen wand from the floor, and the line of his shoulders was rigid, and the silver ring caught the light as his hand closed hard around the wood, knuckles paling. The banana rolled back to the center of the floor between them and sat there, glowing a triumphant, vicious gold, radiating the unmistakable satisfaction of a sentry who has repelled a breach. "It," said Draco to the wall, in a voice held together with visible effort, "is going in a box. You can't put it in a box." "I can put it in a box, Granger. I have several boxes. I am extremely capable of locating a box. It'll fade. It needs to see me. It gets listless when it can't." She stopped because she had heard how that sounded, and because Draco had turned to look at her with an expression she could not pass. Something complicated working behind the grey. "It's data," she finished too quickly. "Its dependency on visual contact with me is data. About the degradation. We agreed to document the degradation." "We did. So we can't box it." "So we can't box it," he agreed. And the agreement cost him. She could see it cost him. And she did not understand why he kept paying these costs, why he kept choosing the path that meant staying in the cold room with her and the murderous fruit when every sensible instinct he had must be screaming at him to walk away. "Fine, it stays. But I'm telling you now, that thing is not getting worse at random. It's getting better at all of this. And the better it gets, the worse the day's going to be when it decides hitting me with the scales wasn't enough." He was right. She knew he was right. She had the figures. She had the degradation curve plotted in her notebook, and the curve was not behaving the way an unstable charm should behave. It was not fraying evenly toward collapse, but spiking, brightening, the animation seeming to concentrate rather than dissipate, as though the thing were burning through its allotment of life faster in order to be more alive while it lasted. She had not shown him that page. She did not entirely know why she had not shown him that page. "The review's in 6 days," she said instead. "We need the stabilization working by then, or McGonagall shuts us down. Can we?" She gestured at the bench, the ruined notes, the scattered apparatus, the whole wreckage of their progress. "Can we just work?" He looked at her for a long moment. The candle leaned in the draught. Somewhere far below in the castle, a clock struck the half-hour, the sound coming up through the stone faint and hollow. "Yes," he said, "we can work." And they did. For the better part of an hour they worked, side by side at the bench, the old prickling rhythm of it returning, her theory and his arithmancy braiding together over the apparatus. And Hermione found that the work was easier now than it had been 6 weeks ago, that they had learned each other's hands, that he passed her instruments before she asked, and she steadied his figures before he faltered, and that the silence between them, when it came, was no longer the silence of enemies waiting for the other to strike, but something else, something with warmth in it, something dangerous. The banana watched from the floor. It had stopped glowing gold. It had gone, instead, a slow and thoughtful amber, and its attention moved between them, from Hermione's bent head to Draco's careful hands and back, with an air of growing, calculating disquiet, as though it had begun, dimly, to understand that the scales had failed not merely to remove the rival, but to do something far worse, to show the woman it loved exactly what the rival would do to keep her safe. It was still sitting there, dim and brooding, when Hermione reached for the same vial of stabilizing solution that Draco reached for in the same instant, and their hands closed over it together, her fingers over his, and the warmth of the contact ran up her arm like a struck note, and they both went still, and neither of them pulled away, and on the floor the banana's light flared from amber to a sudden scalded white. They did not pull away. That was the fact Hermione carried out of the laboratory that night and could not put down, that for 3 full seconds, perhaps 4, neither of them had moved their hand from the vial, and the cold glass had warmed between their stacked fingers, and she had felt the precise topography of his knuckles under her palm, the silver ring biting cool against her skin, and she had looked up and found him already looking at her with the ice gone out of his eyes. And the only reason they had broken apart at all was that the banana had hurled itself into the leg of the bench with a force that rattled the whole apparatus. She catalogued it the way she catalogued everything. Sustained voluntary contact, no withdrawal reflex, pupil dilation, subject and self. She wrote it in her notebook under the degradation figures, in a hand that was steadier than she felt, and then she looked at what she had written and was appalled at herself, at the clinical cowardice of it, at the way she could only hold the thing by pretending it was data. The truth, which she did not write down, was simpler and worse. She had stopped dreading the cold 7th floor room. She had begun, somewhere in the last fortnight, to look forward to it, to the 4 minutes late arrival that announced him, to the dry contempt that had thinned into something almost like banter, to the particular quality of his concentration when he bent over a difficult line of figures and forgot, briefly, to perform being a Malfoy. She looked forward to Draco Malfoy. The sentence was so absurd, she could not finish thinking it without flinching, and yet there it was, true in her chest where the truth lived, whether she examined it or not. The next evening the banana changed tactics. She understood it the moment she pushed open the laboratory door, because the room was wrong. Cold, always, but tonight there was a smell beneath the ozone and stone she knew so well. Something sweet gone sour, something fermenting. And when she lit the candles, she found the cause. Every vial of stabilizing solution on the bench had been uncorked. not spilled. Uncorked deliberately, the stoppers lined up in a neat, malevolent row along the windowsill, and the solutions inside left open to the damp November air, which had got into them and clouded them, and ruined 6 days of careful brewing in a single night. Draco arrived 4 minutes later and stopped in the doorway. "It uncorked them," he said. Not a question. He crossed to the bench, lifted one vial, held the clouded solution to the candle, set it down with a control that was more alarming than shouting would have been. 6 days. It uncorked 6 days of work and lined the stoppers up so we'd know it was on purpose. The banana sat on the windowsill above the row of stoppers, glowing a placid, satisfied gold, the very picture of innocence, which was somehow the most damning thing of all. The reviews in 5 days. Hermione heard her own voice climb and hated it. "We can't rebrew 6 days of stabilizer in 5 days. It's a fixed cure. It needs..." She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. "It needs to set. There's no charm for it. You can't rush it. That's the entire point of a stabilizing solution. It's stable because it's slow." "I know how a stabilizer works, Granger." "Then you know we're finished. We walk into that review with clouded vials and a notebook full of degradation we can't explain, and McGonagall shuts us down, and a year of..." She stopped. Her voice had cracked, and she would not let it crack, not in front of him. And she turned away to the window and stood with her back to the room and her arms wrapped around herself, watching the rain unspool down the black glass, the candlelight throwing her own pale reflection back at her, hollow-eyed. For a long moment there was no sound but the rain. Then, behind her, the scrape of a stool, the soft clink of glass. She turned, and Draco had sat down at the bench, and he had drawn the ruined vials toward him in a row, and he was rolling up his sleeves, the left a fraction lower than the right, always, and reaching for the crushed moonstone and the silver filings and the cold apparatus of a fresh brew. "What are you doing?" "Starting again. It takes 6 days. We have 5. Then we lose by 1 day instead of by all of them, and I would rather lose by 1. He did not look up. He was measuring moonstone into the mortar with a precision that did not waver, and his voice, when it came, was low and even, and stripped of every ornament. "I've spent a great deal of my life walking into rooms where the thing was already lost before I arrived. I find I'd rather walk into this one having tried." She stood very still. It was the nearest he had come, in 7 weeks, to saying any of it aloud. The war, the year before it, the long catalogue of rooms he'd stood in, and choices he had not made, and harm he had not stopped. He had never spoken of it. She had never asked. The whole architecture of their cold partnership had been built on the unspoken agreement that the past was a sealed room neither of them would open, and now he had set his hand on the door of it, not with a speech, not with a melodrama of guilt, but with this: "I'd rather walk into this one having tried." And the restraint of it, the way the enormity sat compressed inside the small plain words, undid her more completely than any confession could have. She crossed the room and sat down at the bench across from him. "Move over," she said. "You're measuring the filings wrong." The corner of his mouth moved, not a smile, but the place a smile would go. "I am measuring the filings exactly to specification." You're measuring them to your specification. The cure sets faster if you bias the silver high. I worked it out in October. You weren't listening. I am always listening. You are never listening. That's why it took us 6 weeks to... She stopped, because she had been about to say to stop hating each other, and that was a door of her own she was not ready to open. She pulled the mortar toward her side of the bench. Just move over. We do it together, or we don't finish in 5 days, and I would rather finish in 5. He moved over. They brewed through the night. It was not like the first night, the night the thing had woken. That night had been all friction, 2 people grinding against each other in the dark. This was something else. A long, quiet, sustained collaboration, the 2 of them passing instruments back and forth across the bench in a rhythm that needed no words. Her biasing the silver high and him correcting the arithmetic ratios to hold the cure together at the new speed. The candles burning down and being replaced, the rain keeping its long, patient time on the glass. Somewhere past 2 in the morning, she stopped noticing the cold. Somewhere past 3, she stopped noticing that they were enemies, because they were not. They had not been for weeks, and the pretense had simply worn through like cloth at the elbow. The banana watched from the windowsill, and its light did a strange thing as the night wore on. It dimmed. Not the listless dimming of being unable to see her. She was right there, in its full view. But something slower and more troubled. The gold leaching toward grey, as though the sight of the 2 of them working together in the candlelight cost it something it could not name. Near 4 o'clock, Hermione's hand slipped. She was exhausted. Her fingers had been steady for 6 hours and chose that moment to fail, and the pipette of unstable base solution tilted in her grip, and a single drop fell toward the open mortar where it would have flashed the whole brew to ruin. And Draco's hand was there. He caught her wrist. Not the pipette. Her wrist, his fingers closing warm and certain around the narrow bones of it, steadying the tremor, guiding her hand back from the brink with a gentleness she had not known was in him. The drop did not fall. The brew held, and his hand stayed where it was, around her wrist, in the candlelight, neither of them breathing. "Steady," he said, very quietly. "I've got you." The 2 words landed somewhere beneath her ribs and detonated soft and slow. She looked up. He was close, closer than the work required. The grey of his eyes warm gold in the candle glow, and the storm she had learned to read in him was not a storm tonight, but something stiller and far more frightening. Something that looked back at her without armour, without contempt, without anything between them at all but the few inches of charged air and the warmth of his hand on her wrist. "Draco," she said. She did not know what she meant to say after his name. She was not sure there was anything after it. The name itself seemed to be the whole of it, the thing she had been circling for 7 weeks, and she watched it land on him, watched his breath catch, watched his gaze drop to her mouth and come back up. He leaned in. She leaned in. And on the windowsill, the banana, which had watched the whole night curdle toward this single suspended instant, which had spent its short, fierce life trying to prevent precisely this, and now saw, dim and grey and too late, that all its sabotage had only built the thing it dreaded. The banana made a sound. It was the first sound it had ever made. A thin, high, keening note, almost too faint to hear. the sound of something small breaking, and its light flared once, desperate and white, and then guttered nearly to nothing, and it toppled off the windowsill and struck the cold stone floor and lay there, dim as a dying coal, and did not move. Hermione was on her feet before she knew she had risen, the almost kiss forgotten, her chair clattering backward, and she crossed the room and dropped to her knees on the cold flagstones and gathered the fading fruit into her cupped hands. And it was cold. It had never been cold before. It had always been warm against her palm, and now it lay grey and still and barely glowing in her hands. While the rain came down and Draco stood frozen at the bench behind her, and she whispered, "No, no, no. What's wrong? What's happening to you?" And the banana, with what little light it had left, turned its dimming attention not toward her for the first time in its life, but past her shoulder toward the man it had spent everything to drive away. It did not die. That was the first mercy, and Hermione clung to it through the long grey hour that followed. The fruit's light did not go out entirely. It guttered, sank to the faintest ember, a pulse so weak she had to hold it close to her face to be sure of it. And then, slowly, over the better part of an hour, it steadied. Not back to gold, not back to the fierce, bright thing it had been, but to a low, exhausted glow, the colour of banked coals, the colour of something that had spent too much of itself and could not afford to spend any more. She had carried it to the bench. She had wrapped it again in the salvaged silk and laid it on a folded cloth in the warmth of the candle circle. And she had sat over it with her notebook open and her quill forgotten in her hand. And she had not written a word, because for once in her life the cataloguing had failed her. There was no column for this. There was no figure that would hold it. Draco had not gone back to the brew. He stood at the far end of the bench, arms folded, watching the fruit with an expression she could not read, and the silence between them had a new texture, not the charged static of the almost kiss, which they had both, by unspoken accord, folded away unexamined, but something graver, the silence of two people standing at the edge of a thing neither of them understood. "It spent itself," she said at last. Her voice came out thin. "The light. When we—" She did not finish. It flared right before it fell. It burned through more in one moment than it does in a whole day. I've been watching the degradation curve for 3 weeks, and it never made sense. It kept spiking instead of fading, and I thought it was instability. I thought the charm was just... She pressed the heel of her hand to her eyes. It wasn't instability. It's been burning itself faster on purpose. Every time it schemed, every time it threw itself at you, every time it's been spending. It only has so much, and it's been pouring it out, trying to get rid of me, Draco said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, then low. And it's nearly empty. She made herself look at the curve. She had plotted it that afternoon, before the vials, and even then the line had frightened her. Now, knowing what she knew, it was unambiguous. The spikes were not random. They mapped exactly to the fruit's worst sabotages, the scales, the uncorked vials, each one a violent expenditure followed by a deeper trough than the last, the baseline sinking lower every time, the whole trend bending down toward a place on the parchment she did not want to put her finger on. "How long?" he said. "I don't know." "Granger, I don't know." It came out cracked, and she hated it, and she could not stop it. Days. If it stops spending, if it just rests, if it stops throwing itself at things, maybe a week, maybe 2, if it keeps... She looked down at the dim ember in the silk. If it keeps doing what it's been doing, less. The rain filled the silence. The candle lunged. She had not let herself think the thing through to its end before, and now, with the fruit cold and faint in front of her, she could not stop thinking it. She had made this. She had poured consciousness into a thing that had never asked to be conscious, had given it just enough awareness to want, to love, to fear losing what it loved. And then she had built, in front of its eyes, night after night, the very loss it feared, and it had spent its small, finite life trying to prevent that loss, and the trying had killed it. Consciousness without suffering, she had written in the margin of her notebook 7 weeks ago. Animation without bondage. She had achieved neither. She had made a thing that could love, and made a world in which its love could only hurt it, and that was a kind of cruelty she had not known she was capable of, and it sat in her chest now like a swallowed coal. "It's my fault," she said. "I made it want something it can't have, and the wanting is killing it." She expected him to argue, to say something brisk and rational about overfilled charms and unstable arithmancy, to retreat into the cold, safe country of the technical the way she always did, the way they both did. Instead, Draco came around the end of the bench and sat down on the stool beside her, close, closer than the work required, the way he had taken to sitting in the last fortnight. And he looked at the dim fruit in its silk for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was very quiet. "My aunt gave me a peacock when I was 9, he said. Hermione turned to look at him. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the banana. Albino, white as bone. It was a gift, which in my family meant it was a kind of test. Could I keep a beautiful thing alive? Could I be trusted with something that depended on me? I loved it the way you love things at 9, completely and stupidly. And it loved me back, or it loved the boy who brought it grapes, which at 9 is the same thing. The silver ring caught the candlelight as his hand moved. It died in the winter. The cold got into the gardens, and I didn't know to bring it in, and one morning it was simply gone. And my father said it was good that it had happened, because now I understood that loving a thing did not make me capable of protecting it, that the two were unrelated, that I should learn the difference young. A pause. I have spent a long time believing him, that the loving and the protecting are separate things, that you can do all of one and none of the other. He stopped. The rain came down. "You pulled me out from under the scales," he said. "I keep coming back to it. You didn't think. You just moved. The loving and the protecting weren't separate for you in that second. They were the same motion." He turned his head, finally, and looked at her. And the storm was there, surfaced, and behind it something that had never been allowed up into the light before. I don't think my father was right. I think he just never met anyone for whom they were the same thing. She could not speak. The room had gone very small and very warm despite the cold, and the few inches of air between them were charged again, the static back, the breath before lightning, and his eyes had dropped to her mouth and come back up the way they had at 4 o'clock. and her own hand had risen without permission and was resting on the bench beside his, not touching, a breath from touching. The banana stirred. It was a small movement, a weak one, the stem swivelling with what was clearly enormous effort, and its faint ember light flickered. And Hermione's hand was already withdrawing, already pulling back from the breath of space between her skin and Draco's, because she understood now what she had not understood before, that every time the fruit saw them lean toward each other, it spent itself trying to prevent it, that the almost kiss at 4 o'clock was very likely what had nearly killed it, and that to lean in now in front of it would be to ask it to burn the last of itself in protest. She drew back. She folded her hands in her lap, and she watched the fruit's light steady, watched the panic ebb out of its dim glow, watched it settle, and the relief that came off it was so palpable, so pathetically grateful, that her eyes stung. Draco had seen it too. She watched him understand, watched the comprehension move across his face, the same arithmetic she had just done, arriving at the same sum. He drew back also. He folded his arms. He put the careful inches back between them, and the storm sank again behind the ice, banked but not gone. And for a moment they simply sat there, the two of them having both just chosen silently and at the same instant to spare the dying thing the sight of what it could not bear to see. "We can't," Hermione said, very low. "It can't watch us. It'll—" "I know. It'll spend the last of itself trying to stop it, and I can't." Her voice failed. "I won't do that to it. I made it. I won't make it watch the thing it's afraid of and burn out trying to fight it. I won't." "I know, Granger." His voice was rough. "I'm not arguing." And he wasn't. That was the thing that broke her open a little, sitting there in the cold candlelight with the dying fruit between them. That he, who would have done anything to win an argument for 6 years of their lives, was not arguing, was sitting perfectly still with his arms folded and the inches restored, choosing the fruit's piece over the thing they both, now, finally, unmistakably wanted. The slow burn of 7 weeks had brought them to the very edge of it, twice in one night, and twice they had drawn back. And now they would have to keep drawing back, for as long as the small, brave, foolish creature she had made still had any light left in it to spend. The banana glowed its low, grateful ember between them. And Hermione looked at it, and looked at Draco looking at it, and felt the unbearable shape of what was coming, that the only way to be with him was to wait for the thing she loved to die, and the only way to spare the thing she loved was to keep refusing the man She reached out and laid one fingertip very gently against the cool curve of the fruit, and it leaned into her touch, trusting, exhausted, and its light brightened by the smallest degree. And across the bench, Draco watched her do it with an expression on his unguarded face that she would not let herself name. Not yet. Not while the cupid she had built was dying of the very thing it had accidentally made. They tried to save it. This was the part Hermione would remember most clearly afterward. Not the schemes, not the scales, not even the almost kisses, but the 3 days she and Draco Malfoy spent bent over a bench trying to keep a banana alive. They did it the way they did everything now, side by side, his arithmancy and her theory braided together. except that the object of the work was no longer the project at all. The stabilizing review was 4 days away, and they had stopped by silent mutual agreement, caring about it. They were trying to mend the cure for a different patient. "If the animation's burning through its charge," Draco said on the first morning, "then in principle we slow the burn. We feed it. We can't refill it. The original convergence isn't reproducible. You'd need the same overflow, the same grounding, and we are not doing that again." A flat look at her, anticipating the objection she had in fact been about to make. "But we might insulate it. Bleed power into it slowly, the way you'd warm a frozen man. Not enough to shock it, enough to take the strain off." It was good arithmancy. It was, in fact, brilliant arithmancy, and Hermione told him so, and watched the rare unguarded surprise cross his face at the compliment, and filed that away too. The way he did not know what to do with praise, the way it landed on him like something he had not been handed often. So they built the insulation, a slow trickle charm keyed to her wand because the fruit would accept power from her hand and recoil from his, a gentle, constant feed designed to take the place of whatever the animation was draining as it burned. And it worked, partly. The fruit's ember light steadied under it, rose a little, held. The keening it had made on the night it fell did not come again. It lay in its silk in the candle's warmth and let her feed it light, and its dim glow turned toward her with a gratitude that was almost worse than the keening. But it would not improve past a certain point, and Hermione understood why, and could not say it aloud for 2 days, and then on the third evening said it. "It's not the burn rate." She had the curve in front of her, the new plotted line, the place where the insulation had lifted the baseline and then flattened it stubbornly short of recovery. The insulation's working. It's slowing the drain. But it's not enough, because the drain isn't the problem. The spending is the problem. Every time it sees something it can't bear, it spends. And it spends faster than we can feed it, and we can't insulate it against... She stopped. "Against us," Draco finished. "Against us." The words sat in the cold air between them. Us. It had become a real thing in the last weeks, a thing with weight, and they had both been stepping around it with elaborate care, and now it lay on the bench beside the curve and could not be stepped around. "So, we don't give it anything to spend on," Draco said. He said it evenly, but she heard the cost in it, the same cost she had heard the night he'd agreed not to box the fruit, not to unmake it, the cost of choosing the thing that hurt. We keep apart. We keep it from seeing, whatever it sees. We feed it, we keep it calm. We don't... His jaw moved. We don't give it a reason to fight. For how long? He didn't answer that. There was no answer to that. The honest answer was, until it dies, and neither of them would say it, because to say it was to admit that the only future in which they got to lean across the bench and finish the thing they kept not finishing was a future the fruit was not in. And Hermione could not hold that thought and look at the dim, grateful ember in the silk at the same time. So they kept apart. They worked at opposite ends of the bench. When she passed him an instrument, she set it down on the wood between them, rather than into his hand. When his figures faltered, she corrected them on the parchment with her quill, rather than leaning over his shoulder. The static was still there. It was always there now, a low, constant charge in every shared inch of the cold room. But they starved it, deliberately, for the fruit's sake, and the starving was its own slow agony, and the banana lay in its silk and watched them keep apart and glowed its small, steady ember and did not have to spend a single drop, and Hermione told herself that was a victory. It was on the fourth night, the eve of the review, that the fruit saved his life again. They had given up on the stabilization entirely by then. The vials were clouded, the cure unfinished, the review a foregone catastrophe, and they had both stopped pretending otherwise. They were in the cold room not to work, but because neither of them could bear to be anywhere. The other was not, even at opposite ends of a bench, even in enforced silence. Draco had been recalibrating the trickle charm, the fruit's insulation, the one piece of work that still mattered to either of them. And he had been doing it for an hour, hunched and exhausted. And he had not noticed what Hermione, half asleep over her own notebook, had also not noticed. That the charm, fed too long through a wand not its keyed source, had begun to back up, to pool, to gather a charge it could not discharge, building silent and invisible in the apparatus directly in front of his bent head. The banana noticed. It noticed, and Hermione understood afterward that it had a choice in that moment, that it could have let the discharge happen, that the surge would have struck Draco and not her, that the thing it had spent its whole short life trying to remove from her side was about to be removed by accident, cleanly, with no blame falling anywhere, and that all it had to do was nothing. It did not do nothing. It threw itself off the bench. The last of its strength went into the leap, a desperate scrabbling roll across the cold wood, and it struck the apparatus square, knocked the pooling charm loose a half-second before it broke, redirected the surge into the stone of the bench, where it cracked harmlessly across the flags, and the recoil of it flung the fruit backward off the edge, and it fell. And this time, when it hit the floor, its light went out completely. No. Hermione was on her knees before the sound finished leaving her. She gathered the fruit into her hands, and it was dark, fully dark, not even the ember left, cold as a stone in her cupped palms, and she said its absence of a name into the cold room. She had never named it, she realized. She had never given it a name, and now it was too late, and the not naming felt like the worst of all her failures. And Draco was on his knees beside her, his hand over hers, over the dark fruit, the keeping apart forgotten, everything forgotten. "It's not gone," he said. "Granger! Look! Look!" And there, in the very heart of the dark fruit, so faint she had to stop breathing to see it, was a spark, the smallest possible spark, a single grain of light, banked down to almost nothing. But there, alive, barely, having spent all but the last atom of itself to push a man it had decided to hate out of the path of his own death. She looked up. Draco was very close, his hand still over hers, both of them cupping the nearly dark fruit between their joined palms, and his face was open and stricken and unguarded. And the storm in him had broken at last, fully broken, and what was under it was not contempt, and not even guilt, but something that had been waiting 7 weeks to be allowed up into the light. "It saved you," she whispered. "It hates you. It's dying, and it spent the last of itself to save you. Why would it?" "Because it knows," Draco said. His voice was barely a sound. His thumb moved against the back of her hand, over her knuckles, the silver ring cool between their skin. Granger. It's known for days. It saw what you do under the scales, and it understood, and it stopped fighting me, because... He stopped. He looked at her, and the few inches of air between them were gone now, almost gone, charged past bearing. Because it would rather you have the thing that keeps you safe than have only it. It chose for you. It chose me for you, because it loves you more than it... He did not finish. He could not finish, because Hermione had stopped listening to the words, was watching only his mouth shape them, and the dark fruit was cupped warm between their joined hands with its single grain of light. And she was leaning in, and he was leaning in, and the 7 weeks and the scales and the uncorked vials and the keeping apart all narrowed down to the last vanishing inch between them. And the spark in the fruit, the last atom of it, the final grain of light it had hoarded against its own death, flared up bright and warm and glad, not in protest, not in panic, but in something that could only be joy, blessing the very thing it had spent its whole life trying to prevent. And the warmth of that small, impossible benediction touched both their hands at once and stopped them, a breath apart, undone. It glowed. That was the thing neither of them could look away from, kneeling on the cold flagstones with the fruit cupped between their joined hands. That the spark had not flared in protest. They had both braced for the keening, for the white panic light, for the small body hurling itself between them. And instead, the last grain of light had risen warm and gold and willing, and stayed, banking itself gently down again, only when they had drawn back, not because it was forced to, but because the moment had passed. "It's not fighting us anymore," Hermione said. Her voice came out wondering, half-broken. "It saw us about to, and it didn't. No." Draco was still very close, his hand still over hers around the fruit. "It blessed it." The word should have sounded absurd from him. It did not. He said it the way he had told her about the peacock, plainly without ornament. And it landed in the cold room and stayed, because there was no other word that fit. The thing she had made had spent its whole short life trying to keep them apart, had thrown itself at scales and inkwells and surges, had nearly died of jealousy 4 separate times, and now, at the very end of itself, it had looked at the two of them leaning toward each other in the candlelight, and chosen, finally, to be glad. She did not understand how, and then she did, all at once, kneeling there. "It learned," she said slowly. "I made it able to want, and wanting means you can change what you want if you understand more. It started by wanting to be the only thing I..." She could not say loved, not with him this close. "The only thing near me, and then it watched you. It watched you for weeks, pull me back from the edge of the bench, agree not to box it, sit up all night rebrewing a cure for it that you didn't have to brew. It watched you choose me over and over in small ways, and it..." Her throat closed. It changed what it wanted. It stopped wanting to be the only one who loved me and started wanting me to be loved, even if it wasn't the one doing it, especially if it wasn't. Draco was quiet for a long moment. The fruit glowed its low, warm gold between their hands. "That's a better creature than most people I've known," he said. "It's a better creature than I made it to be. I gave it the capacity to learn that. I didn't think it would. I thought... She looked down at the dim, grateful light. I thought I'd built a thing that could only suffer from what it wanted. And instead, it taught itself the one thing I've spent my whole life failing to learn. That loving someone and needing to be the center of them aren't the same thing. That you can want the best for someone even when the best for them isn't you. She had not meant to say so much. The words had come out of the place where the truth lived, the place she usually kept locked, and they hung in the cold air between them, and Draco was looking at her with the storm fully broken now, and something steady and terrified underneath it. And she understood that she had said, especially if it wasn't the one doing it, and that he had heard it, and that they were no longer talking only about the fruit. They did not finish it that night. The fruit's spark was too low. The keeping apart had become a habit too deep to break in an instant. And there was, besides, a thing they had both forgotten in the long crisis, which arrived the next morning in the form of a knock at the laboratory door. The review. Hermione had not slept. She had carried the fruit back to its silk and fed it the last of the trickle charm and sat over it through the grey dawn. And when the knock came, she was still in last night's clothes, ink on her cuff, hair wild, and Draco, who had also not gone, who had spent the night on the far stool with his arms folded and his eyes on her and the fruit, rose to open the door, and Professor McGonagall came into the cold room and took in a single sweeping glance, the clouded vials, the cracked bench, the unfinished cure, and the two exhausted students who had clearly not slept and were standing rather closer together than enemies stand. "Well," she said, "I had expected a stabilizing solution. I see I shall have to adjust my expectations." "Professor," Hermione began. "The solution failed," Draco said over her. He stepped forward, putting himself between McGonagall and the bench, between McGonagall and the silk-wrapped fruit, Hermione realized, his body angled to shield it. "The fault is mine. The stabilization arithmancy was my responsibility, and I miscalculated the cure rate. Miss Granger's animation theory is sound. The failure is in my mathematics, not her charm work, and if the project is to be marked down, it should be marked down against me." Hermione stared at him. It was a lie. It was a flat, deliberate, self-sacrificing lie. The cure had failed because the fruit had uncorked the vials, and they both knew it. And Draco was standing there taking the whole weight of it onto himself to protect two things at once, her marks and the creature in the silk that had ruined the brew. He had spent 6 years of their lives making sure every failure landed on her. And now he was lying to a professor to make a failure land on himself instead, and doing it without a flicker, his voice even, his shoulders square, the silver ring catching the grey light as his hand opened in a gesture of plain admission. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment. "The arithmancy," she said, "was, by your own working that you submitted in October, correct to the 9th decimal. I read it, Mr. Malfoy. I do not believe your mathematics failed." Her gaze moved deliberately to the silk on the bench, where a faint gold glow was visible to anyone who knew to look. "I believe something rather more interesting happened in this room, and I believe the two of you have spent rather more effort concealing it than completing it. The animation succeeded, spectacularly and dangerously, and entirely outside the scope of the project as approved. A pause. Which is precisely the kind of failure that advances a field. I will need the full records, all of them, including the ones you have not shown me. She did not wait for an answer. She crossed to the bench, and Draco stepped aside, and McGonagall looked down at the silk-wrapped fruit with its faint gold light, and something in the severe lines of her face shifted, fractionally, into something that was almost gentleness. "You made a conscious thing," she said. "Not to either of them, to the fruit. And it loves you. I can see that it loves you." She straightened. "You understand that this cannot be sustained. The charge will not hold. You have made something that can love and cannot last, Miss Granger, and that is the oldest and most painful magic there is, and there is no arithmancy in the world that will mend it." She gathered her cloak. "Document everything. Spare it what suffering you can. And when it goes," she paused at the door, "remember that the having of a thing and the keeping of it were never the same, and that the first is not made worthless by the loss of the second. Some of us learn that too late to use it." She inclined her head once, an unreadable courtesy, and was gone. The cold room held her absence. Hermione let out a breath she had not known she was holding. She knew the whole time. She always knows. Draco was still looking at the door. "She gave us the project together on purpose, cross-disciplinary partnership." His mouth moved, that place where a smile would go. "I think she has been conducting an experiment of her own." Hermione laughed, a cracked, helpless sound, the first laugh in days. And Draco turned at the sound of it, and the laugh died on her mouth, because he was looking at her with the whole of his unguarded face, the storm gone, only the steady, terrified warmth left, and the few feet of cold air between them had become, suddenly, the only thing in the room. "You lied to McGonagall," she said. "For me. For it. You took the fault." "Yes." 6 years, she said. "You spent making everything my fault. Every failure, every mark." "Yes," he said again, quieter. "I know what I spent 6 years doing, Granger. I have thought about very little else lately." He did not reach for the speeches. She watched him not reach for them, watched him refuse the easy melodrama of guilt, and stand instead in the plain, unbearable fact of it. "I can't give those years back. I've stopped pretending I can. But I find I can choose what I do in this room, today, with you in it. And what I do is, I take the fault when the fault is mine to take, and I sit up all night and I lie to a professor for a banana, and His voice dropped. He took one step toward her across the cold flags closing the room. "And I have wanted, for 3 nights, to finish the thing we keep not finishing, and the only reason I haven't is that I would not buy it at the cost of that creature's last hour." Hermione could not breathe. "It's glowing," she whispered. She did not look away from him. "Right now. Look. It's glowing gold. It's not afraid. It wants us to—" And the fruit was. On the bench, the silk-wrapped ember had risen to a warm, willing gold, pulsing gently, the way it had pulsed the first night it woke, and decided she was the center of all things, except that now its light was not pointed at her and away from him, but spread evenly over both of them, where they stood a single step apart, blessing them, urging them, spending what little it had left, not to keep them apart, but to push them, finally, together. Draco took the last step. He took the last step, and the cold room narrowed to nothing, and Hermione had a single suspended breath in which to understand that it was happening, that after 7 weeks of drawing back, they were not going to draw back, that the fruit was glowing gold and glad, and the rain was on the glass, and his hand was rising to her face. And the candles went out, all of them at once, snuffed by a pressure she knew, a familiar magical vacuum that sucked the warmth from the air. And for one disoriented instant, Hermione thought the fruit had changed its mind after all, had spent its last to stop them one final time. And then she understood with a cold drop in her stomach that the pressure was wrong. Bigger, wilder. Not the fruit's small jealous flare, but something vast and unstable, building in the dark of the laboratory like a held breath about to break. And she knew the feel of it because she had felt it once before, on the night the thing woke. The convergence, she said into the black. Draco, the apparatus, the trickle charm. It's been feeding the fruit for 4 days through my wand. It's built up the same conditions as the first night. The overflow, it's going to... Down, he said, and his arm was around her, dragging her sideways and down behind the heavy stone end of the bench, and the laboratory detonated with light. Not fire. Light, raw, white, the unbound overflow of an animation charge that had nowhere to ground itself, exactly the catastrophe she had narrowly averted on the first night by flinging it into a banana. Except there was no banana to fling it into now, or rather there was. But the fruit was nearly empty, a husk with a single grain of light, and the surge that was building would not gently wake an object the way the first one had. It would shatter the room. It would shatter, Hermione understood with terrible clarity, crouched behind the bench with Draco's body curved over hers, anything in the room not protected by stone. And they were behind stone, but the fruit was not. The fruit was on the open bench in its silk, directly above the heart of the surge. She moved before she decided to, the same motion as the scales, the loving and the protecting fused into one reflex. She lunged up over the lip of the bench, reaching for the silk, reaching for the small dying thing she had made and never named. And Draco's hand closed on her arm. Granger. No. And the surge broke. What happened next she would reconstruct only afterward, in fragments, because it happened faster than thought. The fruit moved first. It rose. The last grain of its light, the atom it had hoarded against its own death, flared up all at once. Not banked, not careful, but spent utterly, everything, in a single blaze of gold. And the fruit lifted off the silk and flung itself not away from the surge, but into it, into the white heart of the overflow, the way it had thrown itself at the scales, the inkwell, the deadly charge above Draco's bent head. It put its small body between the surge and the two of them. It grounded the catastrophe through itself, the way Hermione had grounded the first one through it, taking the whole unbound charge into its emptied husk. And the white light poured into the fruit, and the fruit took it, all of it. And for one impossible incandescent instant, it blazed brighter than the candles, brighter than the lightning at the window, a small gold sun in the dark, cold room, a thing that had been a banana and was now, briefly, pure light, pure love, pure willing sacrifice. And then the light folded inward, and the surge was gone, grounded, harmless. The pressure released all at once, so that the rain was suddenly loud again on the glass, and the fruit dropped to the stone bench with a soft final sound and lay still. Dark, fully, completely dark. No ember, no grain, no spark hoarded in the heart of it. It had spent everything, not on jealousy this time, not on sabotage, but on the two of them, on keeping safe the very pair it had spent its life trying to part. It had grounded a catastrophe through its own body and burned out doing it gladly, the way it had glowed gold and willing a moment before the candles died. And now it lay on the cold bench in its rumpled silk, small and yellow and ordinary. A banana, only a banana. And the thing that had loved her was gone. Hermione made a sound she did not recognize as her own. She gathered it up. She cupped it in her hands the way she had cupped it every night, and it was cold, and it stayed cold, and there was no slow steadying this time, no faint returning pulse, no spark to coax back from the edge. There was only the small dark weight of it in her palms, and the rain on the glass, and the ringing silence where its glow had been. She held it against her chest, and she bent over it, and the grief came up out of her, in a way grief had not been allowed to come for years, since the war, since everything, a great cracking wave of it, because it was such a small thing, and it had loved so completely, and learned so much, and asked for nothing in the end but to keep her safe, and she had never even given it a name. Draco's arms came around her, not the protective curve of a moment ago, shielding her from a surge. This was different. This was his arms folding around her where she knelt on the cold flagstones, with the dark fruit clutched to her chest, drawing her back against him, his cheek against her hair, holding her while she broke. And he did not say, "It's all right," because it was not all right. And he did not say it was only a banana, because they both knew it had not been. And he did not reach for a single one of the easy, hollow comforts. He only held her, steady and silent, the way he had learned to be steady and silent in the worst of his own life, and let her grieve the thing she had made and lost. "I never named it," she said into his chest when she could speak. 7 weeks. I never gave it a name. I was afraid that if I named it, you'd love it too much to bear losing it. His voice was rough above her hair. "I know. I didn't name the peacock either after the first one. For years, I wouldn't name anything." His arms tightened. "It didn't need a name, Granger. It knew what it was to you. You can see that's true. It knew." She lifted her head. He was very close, his face inches from hers, and there were no candles, only the grey stormlight from the window and the lightning that came intermittently to throw them both into stark silver relief, and his eyes were wet. Draco Malfoy's eyes were wet, for a banana, for her. And the 7 weeks were behind them, and the fruit was gone, and there was nothing left in the room to draw back for, no jealous glow to spare, no last hour to protect, nothing between them at all but the small, cold weight of a dead thing that had spent its whole life trying to bring them here. "It wanted this," Hermione whispered. "At the end, it glowed gold. It wanted us to. It grounded the surge so we'd be here to—" Her voice failed. She tried again. "It died, making sure we'd get to. We can't waste what it—" "No," he agreed, very low, and his hand rose to her face at last, the way it had been rising when the candles died, his thumb moving along the line of her cheekbone, the silver ring cool against her skin, and his palm warm beneath it. "We can't waste it." She she closed the distance. Or he did. Afterward, neither of them could say which, and it did not matter, because it was the same motion, the loving and the having fused at last into one. Her hands still cupped around the small dark fruit between their chests, his hand at her face and his other arm around her back, and her mouth finding his in the grey stormlight, soft and certain, and 7 weeks overdue. It was not the desperate thing she had half imagined in the long, sleepless nights. It was slow. It was careful. It tasted of salt, her tears or his, and of ozone and crushed mint, and of all the things they had not said, and now did not need to. And the lightning lit the room silver and went dark, and lit it silver again. And the rain came down, and Draco Malfoy kissed Hermione Granger over the body of the small brave creature that had brought them there, gently, completely, the way you kiss someone you have decided not to let go of. And cupped between their hands, where it had gone dark and cold and still, where there was nothing left to spend and no spark left to give, the fruit grew warm. The warmth came first, against the skin of their joined palms, and then the light, faint, a single grain of it, the smallest possible spark waking in the dark heart of the fruit, exactly as it had been on the night it nearly died. Hermione broke the kiss with a gasp and looked down. Draco followed her gaze, and there, cupped between their 2 hands in the storm-grey dark, the banana glowed, faintly, barely, but unmistakably, a low warm ember pulsing, alive, where a heartbeat ago there had been nothing but cold and weight and the small dead end of everything. It's... Hermione could not finish. Her hands were shaking around it. It was gone. It spent everything. I held it. It was cold. There was no spark left. How? Draco was staring at the ember with the look of a man watching arithmancy he had pronounced impossible solve itself in front of him. It grounded the whole surge through itself, he said slowly. The entire overflow. The same charge that woke it the first time, except far more of it. Far, far more than the original convergence. It took all of it. It should have shattered the husk. He looked up at her. It didn't shatter. It absorbed. Granger. What if it didn't burn out, grounding the surge? What if it refilled? Hermione breathed. She understood it all at once. The whole of it. The arithmancy clicking into place with a clarity that made her dizzy. The first night, the original convergence had been small. A single overfilled term, an accidental overflow, just enough to wake a thing and grant it a finite fading allotment of life. But the surge tonight had been vast. 4 days of trickle charm pooled and broken loose, an overflow many times the size of the one that had made it. And the fruit, nearly empty, a husk with 1 grain left, had thrown itself into the heart of that flood. Not to ground it and die, though it had not known it would survive, though it had meant to die, had been glad to die for them. And the flood had poured into it, all of it, far more than it had ever held, and the husk had not shattered. It had filled. It's not fading anymore, she said. She held it up to the lightning light, turning it, reading the glow the way she had learned to read it over 7 weeks. And the glow was not the desperate, spent flicker of a dying thing. It was steady. It was deepening, the ember climbing toward gold as she watched, gathering itself, the way a fire gathers when fresh fuel catches. The original charge was finite. That's why it was dying. It only had so much, and it kept spending it. But this, Draco, the surge tonight was orders of magnitude larger. It didn't just survive grounding it. It took it. It's not running out anymore. It might... Her voice cracked on the impossible arithmetic of it. It might never run out. The fruit, as if to answer her, flared. The gold rose all at once, full and warm and bright, the way it had blazed the first night it woke and decided she was the center of all things. Except that the desperation was gone from it now, the jealousy gone, the fear of losing gone. It glowed steady and strong and whole, a thing that had spent its life afraid of ending, and was, against every law of the charm that made it, suddenly not ending at all. And its light, when it had gathered itself fully, did not point at Hermione and away from Draco. It spread evenly, generously, over the two of them where they knelt together on the cold flagstones, over their joined hands, over their faces still close from the kiss. And it pulsed, once, twice, in a rhythm she had no instrument to measure, but every instinct to understand. It was glad. It was simply, completely glad. Hermione started to laugh, and the laugh broke halfway into a sob, and Draco's arm tightened around her, and she felt him laughing too, the disbelieving, exhausted laugh of someone who has been braced for grief and handed joy instead. "It chose to die for us," she said. "It threw itself into a surge it thought would kill it, to keep us safe, and instead of killing it, the sacrifice saved it," Draco finished. "The thing it did out of love is the thing that made it last." He shook his head slowly, looking at the steady gold light. "That's not arithmancy. There's no figure for that." "No," Hermione agreed, holding the warm fruit against her chest, against the heart that was still beating hard from the kiss. "There isn't." They named it that night. It seemed, afterward, the most natural thing in the world, though Hermione had been too afraid to do it for 7 weeks. She had been afraid that naming it would mean loving it past bearing, past the loss she had known was coming. But the loss was not coming now, and so she could love it as much as she liked, and the loving could finally come with a name. "Cupid," Draco suggested, dry, the place where a smile would go finally becoming an actual smile, the first true one she had ever seen on him. Given its work. It tried to do the opposite of Cupid's work for 7 weeks. And achieved Cupid's work anyway. That's the joke, Granger. That's the whole joke. It spent everything it had trying to keep us apart, and every single thing it did drove us together. The scales, the inkwell, the vials. Every scheme was a step closer. It was the worst Cupid in the history of love, and it succeeded completely. He looked at the fruit, glowing gold in her hands. It deserves the name precisely because it didn't mean to. So Cupid it was. The worst Cupid in the history of love, who had wanted to be the only thing she loved and learned, instead to want her loved at all, who had thrown itself between her and harm 3 times and died doing it the 4th, and lived, who had aimed every arrow at the wrong target and hit the right one every time. Spring came late to the castle that year, but it came. The 7th floor laboratory was warm now. Draco had finally found the loosened lead in the windows and sealed it properly with a charm that held, and the draft that had gutted the candles for 7 cold weeks was gone, and the long grey rain of November and December and the slush of February had given way at last to a clean green light that came through the mended glass in the afternoons and lay across the bench in bright bars. Hermione worked there still, most evenings. The project had become, with McGonagall's quiet and entirely unsurprised blessing, something far larger than the modest charm she had set out to make. A study of animation that could last, of consciousness that need not suffer, of the strange, impossible arithmetic by which a thing might be made more alive by an act of love than by any spell. Consciousness without suffering, she had written in the margin of her notebook in the autumn. Animation without bondage. She had thought that night that she had failed at both. She understood now that she had simply not yet seen how it would end. Cupid sat on the windowsill in the spring light, glowing a contented gold, watching her work. It did not scheme any more. It did not need to. It had got, in the end, the thing it had truly wanted underneath all the jealousy. Not to be the only one who loved her, but to see her loved and safe and happy. And it watched her be all three with the deep settled glow of a creature whose wanting and whose having had finally become the same thing. Draco arrived 4 minutes late, as he always did, the small territorial ritual surviving even now, even though they both knew it for the fond fiction it was. He set a cup of tea at her elbow, proper tea, hot, not the pond water she used to forget for hours, and he leaned over her shoulder to read the line of figures she was working, close, the way he had always leaned in, except that now, when his hand came to rest on the bench beside hers, she turned her own hand over and laced her fingers through his without looking up, and the silver ring was warm against her skin, and on the windowsill, Cupid glowed a brighter, gladder gold at the sight of it. "You've left the third term open," Draco murmured against her hair, deliberately. "It'll overfill. I'll cap it. After." She tilted her head back to look at him, and he was smiling, the true smile, the one only she and a banana had ever seen, and the spring light lay gold across them both. "I've learned a few things about what happens when you overfill the third term." "So have I," he said, and kissed her, slow, certain, unhurried, the way you kiss someone when there is no jealous fruit left to spare, and no last hour to protect, and nothing in all the world to draw back for, and on the windowsill, in the clean green light of a spring that had finally come. The worst and best Cupid in the history of love glowed gold and warm and whole, and watched the two it had brought together, and was, at long and unlikely last, content.
So that's the vast story. I want to tell you something honest. When I started writing this, I thought it was just a silly idea. A banana that falls in love. Come on, it sounds like a joke, but more I wrote, the more I cared about it. There is a small moment I keep thinking about. Near the end, the banana throws itself into the danger. It wants to save them. It thinks it will die, and it's glad to die anyway. That part stayed with me for a long time because that was is a real love looks like. Sometimes love is not be mine. Sometimes love is be safe, be happy, even if it's not with me. The little banana wanted to keep Draco and Hermione apart. It tries so hard, and every single time it pushed them closer. That made me smile. Life is often like that. The thing we are fight against is sometimes the thing that saves us. I hope this story made you feel something, a little love, a little age, maybe both. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Take care of your heart and take care of people you love. See you in the next story.